DirectAmp from Quilter Labs is a compact, straight to the point, no BS piece of gear. It's something that literally anyone can benefit from, whether you are a touring guitarist or a home studio rock star. In this video, I'll go over everything you need to know about it. I'll give you all the different sound examples you could imagine. Break down all of its features, and most importantly, help you figure out to see if this is right for you. Now, if you enjoy this video or you find any of it helpful, make sure to subscribe to support me and my channel. And if you end up even wanting to go further to learn more about the DirectAmp, there's a link to their website. You can check it out all there. But also, I was super lucky enough to stop by Quilter Labs headquarters and studio to help them with the release of the DirectAmp. I filmed the behind the scenes of the session in their studio. It's really fun. So if you want to check that out, you can do so up here, or you'll find the link in the description. Let's now dive into the DirectAmp. Now, genuinely, I'm being very serious when I say this. I haven't stopped using it for home recording, sessions, writing songs, all mainly due to its ease of use and its versatile and incredible sounds. And I will show you all those sounds, but I do think it's important to sort of learn about what's on it first, just so you have a better understanding of what you will be hearing. Now, if you're impatient, like myself, feel free to click around. I have time codes for you, so you can kind of hear whatever you want right now, and if you want to come back to this later, be my guest. So at a first glance, it can seem like there's a lot to it, and there is, but it's not as complicated as it looks. I'll first jump into the main board. So starting off, we have the power switch. We can either do mono or stereo. Right now it is in stereo. To turn it off, you just put that in the middle, and if you want mono, you bring that to the left, and if you want stereo, you bring that all the way to the right. Now this wireless input switch, that is to hook up Bluetooth to your phone. So when this is hooked up to a monitor or whatever, you can sync your phone and play songs through this as well. Really, really cool feature. Now I'll talk about the bottom knobs. Like I said, we have master, we have output, then we have a reverb knob to control the level of our reverb, and then a limiter knob. And then the other three right here is our simple EQ, treble, mid, and bass. Now these two knobs up here, this is to control our gain for whatever amp we are choosing. And then this is a boost knob. So when we turn on the boost, we can select which boost we want and how much of that boost we want. Now the amp types, we have a JMP, which is a Marshall, an AC15, which would be a Vox, and then a Fend, which would be a Fender amp. You can select that easily with this switch, and then like I said, you can control the gain for whatever amp you're on. Now the speaker types, we have a CL80, a V30, and a Gents. We can control that via this switch. And then a feature for me that for some reason I really love that they included is a closed and open back cab type that you can switch through that as well. And there's also a cab sim off. So basically what that means is that there's no speaker cabinet that your amp's running through. It's pretty much just your amp running straight through the monitors or whatever you're running the DirectAmp through. Now you can use this to get like a cool fuzz sound if you're plugging this thing directly into your interface. I've done this before where I turn the sim off, I run like a Vox or Marshall, I bring the gain up, and it gives you like that kind of gritty, fuzzy tone. A lot of like indie rock bands in like the 2010s did a lot of stuff, but it can also be compared to those fuzz sounds from like the 60s and 70s. It's just a fun thing to experiment with. Now with all these different variations of amps and speaker types, I mean, you can literally have so many different combinations. Let's say we have the Fender amp with the CL80 and we have a closed back cabinet. We can change any of these speakers with the Fender, any of the cab types with the Fender, same thing with the Vox and the Marshall. Now for the Q boost, we have three options. We have fat, BRT, and flat. Now moving on to the foot switches, we have a effects loop, reverb, limiter, and boost. Having foot switches for all four of these things makes also a really great live tool. Now getting into the top section of the DirectAmp, right here we have an aux in. We have where we plug this bad boy in, and then we have headphones where we can plug in a 1/4-inch headphone jack if you need to be quiet. Now we have the effects return left and right and the effects send, and then of course our guitar input. And since this is a stereo unit, we have a left out and right out XLR. You do not need to put 2 XLR cables for this to work. If you want to run mono, that's completely fine. You can plug it into either one and that'll work just fine. Now we also have some lit up sections of this, which is really, really great because we know when, let's say, our reverb is engaged. Now, right now, it would be off, but we can see that if we're playing live and when we look down on the direct amp. Now, if we go from boost, you'll notice that the clean on will switch over to the boost on. So you'll know when the boost is on, you'll know when to turn it off when you have to. The effects loop, same thing. When you turn it on, it tells you that it's on. It's little extra features like that that make this thing so user-friendly. Same thing with the limiter, that lets us know as well, and then our cab type, if that's on or off. Same thing with the wireless input, and if we're doing stereo, it'll light up the stereo button. So that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. It's also really, really lightweight. We'll get into that later. So let's now listen to what this thing sounds like. So since there's just so much going on with this piece of gear, here's how I will do the sound examples. So I'll basically just adjust the tones in real time when I'm playing with each of those guitars. I'll mess with the cab sims, I'll mess with the reverb, the boost, all that stuff. And then later on, I'll dive into those things a little bit deeper. And then of course, after these sound examples, I will talk about them. So enjoy. great thing about each amp type, Fender, Vox, and Marshall, is that they all really hit the mark on what they are simulating. Now, in today's age with all the technology, it's not like the hardest thing to do anymore, but this thing does it incredibly well. You literally have three of the most iconic amp sounds of all time at your fingertips. And then you have all that other extra features on top of that. Now, all those sounds you just heard were in stereo because why not take advantage of that? But you're also more than welcome to play this thing in mono. Now, if you really want to hear this thing in different tonal diversities in the context of real music, check out my Instagram page. I post these little 30-second to minute clips of synths, drums, bass, guitars, acoustic guitars, and all that, so you'll be able to hear this thing in a whole mix. You'll see the ones that I'm talking about. My dog's probably in it most of the time, and there's always like some sort of theme to it. All those guitars you are hearing are all coming from the DirectAmp. If you want to check that out, my Instagram handle is in the description. Also, follow if you want to see more guitar content like this. So now what I'm going to do is show off all of those extra options and foot switches in more detail. So the limiter, the boost, the reverb, and the effects loop. And I'll start with the limiter. The limiter is just a great tool to have, and it really does shine through its best with more gainy style tones. Let's now hear what the boost will do with all three of its options. The boost is obviously another great feature that they added. Good job, Quilter. It gets very distorted and heavy, as you could imagine, and the fat is probably the favorite out of the three for me because it sounds the most warm and the most full. And cranking the boost while you have any of the three amp types cranked with the full gain gets insanely heavy and it sounds great. And depending on what amps you're using, you can get like those fuzz, gritty tones. I love it. Speaking of other things that I love, reverb, let's dive into the reverb foot switch. Again, the fact that it has a foot switch to engage the reverb whenever you want is super helpful. When you run it in stereo and you blast that reverb, you can get some ambient stuff. Now, I will say it's not the most ambient soundscape you've ever heard. It's a simple but very effective reverb that's built in. Then obviously you can use whatever pedals you want for that more soundscapey thing. Or you could plug in your ambient pedal board via the effects loop, so let's now jump into that. The effects loop just makes tons of sense if you have a huge, very intermediate to complicated pedal board. If you like those Marshall heavier tones, because if you plugged your pedal board straight through the DirectAmp, you know how it gets. It gets very muddy, so the effects loop helps with that. There's obviously a lot of other things you can use the effects loop for, but that's primarily what I use it for. Now again, the fact that we have a foot switch to engage the effects loop whenever we want makes it a great live show tool as well. Now speaking of that, let's now jump into who I think the DirectAmp is primarily for. Normally when I get to this part of the video, I really have a certain person that I know whatever piece of gear I'm demoing at that time is for, but this one's kind of tough because it can truly be for so many people. Let's say you're a touring guitar player and you have the greatest rig ever, but you always need a backup. Having something like this is the perfect backup. Why? Because it's super small, it's compact, it sounds great, you have a versatile range of different tones. You have all those foot switch options, you have the effects loop options, all of that. So truly, you can use this as a backup if you are a professional touring guitar player. You could even use this as your main rig if you're playing smaller shows or even giant shows. It doesn't matter. If you like how this sounds, you could use it for that stuff. But if you're on smaller tours or you have to fly wherever and you can't bring a tube amp, can bring something like this. It could be your main rig. It could be the backup to your Kemper. Whatever it may be, it's always there, and it does not take up a lot of room at all. It's also great for the bedroom beginner guitarist who is sort of learning and understanding how you get and what sounds come from different amps and different cabs. Great learning tool. You can run it in stereo, so you have that option as well. You can use it for sessions. You can plug your pedal board directly through this thing. Literally anyone can use it. This thing is literally for anyone, which is what I'm trying to get at. Now, obviously, you cannot plug it into a speaker cabinet. You can't use it like a real amp head, but it's called the DirectAmp, so that's not what this is built for. Quilter does have options like that if that's something you're looking for. Go out and check their website for that. But most people have a home studio. Most people use amp simulations in their digital audio workstation anyway for ease of use, being quiet. This is just another option on the market that you can actually physically take with you and you don't have to bring your computer around. My honest final thoughts is that I'm very impressed with the DirectAmp. All these demos that I'm going to be doing in the future of gear and stuff with pedals, I'm going to be running it through this. Would I still prefer to use a tube amp? I prefer to use a tube amp over everything all the time. And honestly, not a tube amp, just like a real amp in general, because it's pushing real air with a real cabinet in the room I'm in. That's just my preference. But being a modern guitar player, this is one of the most useful tools I've ever used. If you want to see other gear related content, you can do so right here. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what your thoughts are on the DirectAmp down in the comments below. If there's any piece of gear in the market that you have your eyes on and you'd like to see me demo that, also let me know down in the comments. Thanks as always for watching, and I will see you in the next video.